The last place you would expect to see an orca is on dry land. But this is what Eric Keane found when he investigated the strange sound he heard while sailing the waters around British Columbia. This orca cried and whined for her pod to get her when she was beached on the sharp rocks. But what rescuers did was incredible. Early on July the 1st, 2015, in the morning, Eric, a whale researcher, was on his boat, the Bangarang, researching the local fin whale population when he heard somber cries. Save Our Seas reported that a baby orca was in evident difficulty, jammed between jagged boulders, rising out of the water from a little protrusion of stone on the coast of Andrew Rocks. Around 7:30 in the morning, Janie Ray and Hermann began to talk. After hearing Eric's story, the orca specialist at the nearby environmental group, Whale Point, understood what must have happened. Eric phoned them to report his discovery. When hunting seals for food, the orca pod there would frequently cooperate, with some orcas pursuing the seals towards the beach. This young female orca may have mistakenly calculated her location. At the same time, others calmly waited to spring the trap, because as the tide moved out, she found herself in an increasingly shallow water. Janie and Hermann traveled back from Hartley Bay towards their base. When he informed them of a young orca's plight, Janie and Hermann knew that time was of the essence and would need all the help they could get to free the young orcas from where they lay wedges between the rocks. Eric was, fortunately, sailing nearby. Eric was well known to Janie and Hermann and often worked closely with them on their research. They thus called Gitka's guardians in Hartley Bay and Fisheries and Oceans Canada DFO, both marine organizations, as they hurried north to join Eric in Squally Channel to inform them of the baby orca's perilous plight. In the meantime, Eric and his team approached the orca to see if they could assist her in getting off the rocks. But they were careful not to approach her too closely at first to avoid shocking her and endangering herself. She may have been trying to flee, but the truth was that if they had lifted her off the rocks or pulled her away, they would have seriously hurt her because the rocks were covered in barnacles that could have sliced through her skin. As it was, she was bleeding slightly from her tail and pectoral area when Janie and Hermann arrived. Eric later discovered the DFO officials John Ford and Paul Cottrell had instructed them via satellite phone to keep the polka cool and wet. The marathon rescue began when they first approached her. The orca was concerned about what their intentions might be. Being trapped, uncomfortable, and surrounded by humans must have been frightening for the young killer whale. Her breathing was quick and shallow, and gravity was obviously making it harder for her. However, when the tides rose again, it would not be for another 8 hours. Eric cleverly constructed a temporary water pump out of a hose and some duct tape and traveled inside the island's rear, where he operated the pump for Hermann, who used the hose to submerge the orca in chilly seawater completely. As they worked, the rescuers carefully positioned wet blankets along the length of the orca's body. The orca's screaming subsided, and the rescuers saw that she was breathing more calmly. It appeared that the orca trusted the humans. They were consoling her, while her family could only remain in the area's water and cold to her. The rescuers took turns pumping seawater over the young orca and changing sheets covering her with newly sea-dipped cooler sheets. They could see that the orca's calf's dorsal was drying out, so they used the pillowcase from Eric's boat to wet it, using seawater and cover the fins all the morning. Fortunately, the weather had been grey and overcast. However, as the sun rose to its zenith at noon, the cloud cover vanished, and the day's heat began in earnest. Working in shifts, the humans diligently cared for the orca as if she had a fever, changing the drier, warming coverings for cooler, wetter ones, while continuously dousing her with seawater from the pump to ensure she would not dry out from the heat of the sun. If Eric had not heard the young female orca's call up to this point, the rescuers could not help but consider how dire the situation might have been for the animal. The rescuers had not covered the orca's head because they didn't want her to be frightened when the sight was abruptly taken away, since she may feel even more helpless. Still, the sun's ferocious rays made it imperative to shield her sensitive skin from heat and dryness. Janie recalls how she observed a crew member approach the orca by gently wading into the boat before her, carefully covering her head with a wet, cold sheet, and avoiding covering her blowhole. This whale was just 9 years old, and the usual life expectancy in the wild is between 30 and 50 years. Her youth and relatively tiny stature also worked in her favor. A fully mature guy may weigh up to 16,000 pounds, which is the weight of an average hippopotamus, rhinoceros, or 7 cows if that helps you understand. 7.257 kilos. The strain on this orca's lungs would have been worse if she had been older and larger, and she would not have survived until the next tide when the water pump finally failed. This might have been a fatal blow, but the sea started to rise again after 9 arduous hours. The tide had risen high enough for the rescuers to release the juvenile orca. No matter how much duct tape Eric used, there was no mending it. The team knew the time had come for the orca to do what only she could, which swam out of the rocky prison. They did not want their presence to startle her into trying too soon and seriously injuring herself. So they walked away and climbed onto a nearby cliff to watch and wait. They all felt the same, sending her all their wishes for strength and willing her to succeed. The young orca continued to lie there, occasionally lifting her tail but making no attempt to swim, as the water level slowly crept up to her body until it covered her. As this happened, she started to cry again, but this vocalization seemed different. Perhaps she was just excited about being released soon. They realized that they only needed to trust the orca's cough's instincts because by moving her tail, she had been testing the depth of the water, and when she knew it was safe and would not risk her any harm, her rescuers were concerned and wondered if something was wrong. Perhaps she was more seriously injured than they had thought, or she was just too exhausted from her long ordeal to make this one last massive push to escape. They were standing in their boats and on the rocks all around her as she abruptly launched herself off the rocks and flew across the water. It had taken more than 9 hours of laborious work and tender care, but the rescuers kept the young orca alive and well until she could return to her pod. Eric had submerged a hydrophone in the water and could play the rescue as the orca sang as she repeatedly vocalized in search of a response from her family. The young female's voice was the only one heard for a while, which caused Eric and the other miracle workers to worry and wonder where the young orca's pod was. Had they given up on her after spending so much time on land, or had they sadly swum away and mourned her loss? As faint replies to the rescued orca's cries became audible from a distance, a wave of relief overcame the waiting listeners. The young female heard her family replies. The team of humans rescuers stood together in their shared emotions. They were feeling so proud and overwhelmed by what they had accomplished together. Each of them had given their all, and they knew with relief that what they had experienced that day would stay with them for as long as they lived. What a great ending! As she swam in the direction of their transient goals, speeding away in joy and the thrill of release, the human rescuers stood together in their shared emotions. If you liked the story, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and see you later.